Do you really know who you are? Have you ever actually asked yourself that without rushing to answer? Because you might think you do. You might even feel sure about it. But be honest, you did this before, you just didn't notice it. You walk into a room, and somehow, you're not the same person anymore. Your tone changes, your energy shifts, even the way you think feels slightly different, and you don't question it. You just adapt. So let me ask you again, not the version of you at home, not the version of you with friends, not the version of you at work. You. Without all of that, do you really know who you are? Or have you just been adjusting so much, you never noticed you disappeared? You tell yourself it's normal. You call it adjusting, reading the room, being flexible, and it feels smart. It feels socially aware because you don't want to be awkward. You don't want to stand out the wrong way. You don't want to say something that doesn't fit. So you shift. Just a little. You laugh at things you wouldn't normally laugh at. You stay quiet about things you actually care about. You soften your opinions, or sometimes you exaggerate them, depending on who you're with. And in your mind, it makes sense. You think, this is just how people are. This is just how social life works. But there's a small moment you probably ignore. That quiet feeling after, when you're alone again, and something feels off. You know this moment? You're with one group. You're loud, confident, joking easily. Everything flows. Then later, you're with someone else. And suddenly, you're more careful, more reserved. You think before every sentence, and you don't even question it. It just happens. Or maybe this one hits closer. You're about to say something, a real opinion, something that actually matters to you. But then you pause. You scan the room. You think, will this sound weird? Will they agree? Will this change how they see me? And just like that, you change it. You rephrase. Or you stay quiet. Or you say something safer. And no one notices, but you do. That small hesitation, that tiny shift, that moment where you almost showed yourself but didn't. And then the conversation moves on like nothing happened. Here's what's actually happening. You're not just adjusting your behavior. You're adjusting your identity. Not consciously, but constantly. Your brain is trying to protect something. Not your safety, not the conversation, your image, the way you are perceived. Because deep down, your mind links acceptance to survival. So every time you're around someone new or someone important, your brain asks one silent question. Who do I need to be right now to belong? And you answer it without realizing it. You become more agreeable or more dominant, more quiet, more funny, more serious, more confident, or less. Not because that's who you are, but because that's what feels safe. And the more you do this, the more automatic it becomes. Until one day, you're not choosing who to be anymore. You're just reacting. Your brain does something interesting here. It builds what psychologists call a social self. Not one, multiple. Different versions of you, stored for different environments. And this isn't rare. It's actually common. Studies on self-concept show that people don't have a single fixed identity. They have what's called a dynamic self, meaning who you are changes depending on context. Your personality isn't as stable as you think. It's responsive, and your brain rewards this because every time you successfully fit in, you get a small sense of relief, a sense of, I did it right, I belong here. And that feeling is addictive. So you keep doing it without asking, at what cost? And this isn't just happening in conversations. You do this at work. You act more competent than you feel, or sometimes less confident, just to avoid pressure. You do this with friends. You match their energy, even when it doesn't match yours. You do this in relationships. You become the version of yourself. You think they'll love more. You soften parts of you, hide parts of you, even change parts of you. And it doesn't feel fake. That's the scary part. It feels natural because you've been doing it for so long. You've probably said this before. This is just how I am with them. But think about that. How many versions of you exist just to maintain connection? How many times have you adjusted just to avoid being misunderstood? And how many times did you walk away from a situation feeling slightly drained without knowing why? So maybe this was never about being socially aware, and it was never about being adaptable. It's about something deeper. You don't change because you want to. You change because you don't feel safe being consistent. Let that sit for a second. Because if you were completely okay with who you are, you wouldn't need to adjust this much. You would still adapt, yes, but you wouldn't disappear. There's a difference between adjusting your behavior and adjusting your identity. One is awareness. The other is quiet self-abandonment. And the hardest part? You didn't even realize it was happening because every version of you felt real in that moment. So now, think about this. All those times you said, "That's just how I am with them." Was that really you? Or was that a version of you built to be accepted? You weren't trying to be fake. You weren't trying to deceive anyone. You were trying to belong. But somewhere along the way, you stopped asking, "Where do I belong?" as myself, and started asking, "Who do I need to be to stay here?" And that shift is so subtle, you almost never notice it until someone asks you a simple question, "Who are you?" And for a moment, you hesitate. If this felt a little too real, if something here made you pause, even just for a second, then you're starting to notice it. The shifts, the patterns, the versions of you didn't even realize you were creating. And once you see that, you don't just move differently around people. You start asking different questions. Not how should I act here, but am I still myself here? And that changes everything.